Exploring the detective archetype in therapy and healing. My name is Eileen Burns. I'm a soul empowerment coach, also a healer, a therapist, and a spiritual business strategist. Now, today I'm going to talk about, well, I'm going to explore a bit about the detective archetype and how the detective archetype can actually show up in your life and in your work, and some of the positive and light traits of the detective, and why the detective archetype is such a useful archetype for many types of therapy and healing work. So let's look at, well, just because Carlene's cards are, Carlene Mrs. cards or Maisie's cards are, yeah, it's not right, is, it has a good, there are a lot of different archetypes that are really useful for people to understand. So we're going to use Carlene's cards. And what I'm going to do is just show you Carlene's cards with the detective archetype. And I'm just going to explore some of the things that Carleen says, and then we'll go into that in different ways. So if you look at the detective archetype, the light attribute is the great powers of observation and intuition, right? The desire to seek out truth. And a detective has, in its light form, has a certain amount of objectivity, but it kind of uses the instinct of the intuition and the inner guidance to maybe look at things from a different perspective and maybe, analyze things from a different perspective. So they use the intuitive aspect and the gut instinct to look up certain things and go beyond what is seen visibly. And they tend then to look at things more objectively as well. There's a bit of the analysis and the intuition. So I suppose it's the left and the right brain. Now, the shadow attribute of the detective is more like voyeurism, people just being really nosy, right? And of falsifying information, taking information and falsifying it for their own gain. And that might be some sort of power, control, manipulation, so that they don't get caught. That can be all sorts of things. And if we look at that just on a basic level from a therapeutic healing, or even from an awakened perspective, so if we look at it in a therapy healing perspective, when a client comes to you and with certain types of modalities and healing approaches, you, in many ways, your role could be part of being the detective, because you are looking at certain information and you can have intuition, but it's if you just go with your intuition all the time. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of being, even though I'm a great believer in personally going with your intuition, sometimes when you're relying on another healer or therapist to go with their intuition, that doesn't always mean that that's truth. So it's important for any healer or therapist to have a bit of objectivity and have that ability to kind of think, it could be this, I'm getting a sense, exploring that, but also being able to listen. A good detective is going to be able to really listen to what people are going to say and get as much information as what they can, right? They can't be lazy in their listening skills. They have to really listen, and they have to be a good observer and notice the subtleties. It's one of the reasons why, for example, good critical thinkers can often be empaths, intuitives, because they tend to see the subtle differences in things, and particularly highly sensitive people, they tend to notice very small, subtle differences in energy and all sorts of things in people's behaviour that other people wouldn't notice, right? So that's why you find that a lot of empaths and sensitive, particularly highly sensitive empaths, become medical intuitives, because they tend to be able to see a lot of really tiny subtle differences. They tend to feel energetic, what's going on in people's bodies, what's going on in their energy field, and things like that. So if we explore this a little bit more, we're just going to read Caroline's card, and then I'm just going to take my take in relation to what we're going to talk about today. So in the book, she talks about, you know, we think about the detective can be the other archetype of what the spy, the detective agent, the sleuth, the snoop. Sorry, I think my glasses are a bit smoked up. Sherlock Holmes, private investigator, the profiler, and it also links up with the warrior and crime fighter, right? Because it's someone, if you think about a warrior is seeking truth and justice, and it is trying to get to the root of what, you know, a crime or evil or whatever, right? Okay. Now, the detective seeks out information that supports solving the crime. So anything that's relatable to that crime, they're looking for the right information to give them the clues, to put the clues together to get that story, to get the bigger picture. And that's the same as a really good therapist or healer, particularly, as I said, certain types of modalities. For example, if you go to a naturopath or someone like, for example, because I had so many rare and complex health challenges from a very young age, and I had lots of mysterious things that, you know, were classed as rare, and then I had some other things. One of the best type of therapists that I found really helpful were those who used more of explorative and kind of detective techniques and really listened and were good observers, but they tend to have a lot of wide knowledge and insight, and and they were good detectives. That was the key, because they had a broader outlook, but they were able to look at things objectively and intuitively, right? There was a balance there. They weren't getting too much in their ego that because sometimes it can be very easy as a healer or whatever, just to so believe that your intuition and your or that client instead of maybe listening to the client's intuition. And a good detective will listen to what the individual is saying and maybe what their interpretation of what went on or what is going on. Right. Now, they combine great powers of observation with highly evolved intuition, and that is the key. They've got really good observation, but they're also got the intuition. Their intuition is kind of off the radar often. They can feel and sense things when things are not right or whatever, right? The spy is associated with surreptitious acquisition of secret information regarding politics, business, or national security. That's what we commonly look at it. And the shadow detective manifests as voyeurism, you know, having a good nosy. Now, one thing that can happen is I've had this experience, which is not pleasant, where people actually climb into your energy field as other healers to be curious, not with your intention. I remember waking up one night and someone was in my energy field, and this person, let's put it this way, a few people had similar experiences. So it's strange what happened. And then it turned out a friend had been discussing something about my challenges, and this person was just being nosy. So they basically climbed into almost, or had a good nosy, and they were in my energy field and playing about, which they had no power. Now that's misabuse. It's against spiritual laws. It's the ego running the show, and it's, you know, it's a real no-no. But also someone falsifying information or selling to the highest bidder. Now, that can come when someone maybe misleads their clients or their audience that maybe they can do a lot of things more than what they can. They're implying things that they don't actually know. They've maybe just been told that this could, but they're actually implying that something can definitely do something, and they're misleading people for their own gain, or they're manipulating numbers or information. I'll give you an example. One situation that happened to me. I was asked by, it was quite a few years ago. She was a kind of doctor of psychotherapy and different things, but she'd also went down into the holistic field, and she was doing a certain modality, and she claimed that this modality was safe for everybody, and it could kind of more or less kind of get rid of chronic pain issues and all other some neurological issues that I had. So she asked me if I would be interested in a session, and that, I said, "Oh, that's really interesting, yeah." And it turned out to be a horrendous experience for me. She asked me to put my body in a certain position. That some of the challenges I had at the time would be what you've classed as I didn't realise at the time, but I would find out and realise after this that it was a contraindication. And she'd made up this kind of to herself by combining a couple of approaches that what you call top neuroscience, people in that kind of field combined, and mind techniques. She combined it, and she was her main goal was to see that it done for everything and it was suitable for everyone. And the experience I ended up having, like it's a type of seizure, I have a kind of non-epileptic seizure, but it was a horrible experience, and I really was unwell after it. And she didn't want to know. It was like she couldn't get rid of me off that session because I did not. She didn't get the result that her ego wanted. Instead of just being compassionate and being fully there and trying to do best for me, it was like she wanted to get off that call because it did not suit her agenda. Now, then what happened, I don't want to get too much about this, but basically then someone that works for her contacted me in relation to something else, and it was implying to try and imply that this technique wanted me to post something to imply that it was it was this thing that was really suitable for everybody. It was safe and it could do this. And I basically, made it very quite clear I wouldn't be doing that, that was misleading, and it was it was basically falsifying information to suit that business. Now, one of the things that I would say about, a lot of things at the moment, we're seeing a lot of this going on, falsifying of information. We're seeing this going on at a lot of high up things in a lot of parts of society where there's been a lot of falsification and people don't know what's truth or fact. And then, there's lots of things where people about things about like fake news and implying that that's false and mainstream is whatever. But people are starting to recognise that a lot of mainstream is more that, it's more the fake, and there's an inversion going on. And this is where part of the awakening journey is actually being able to discern truth from fact and using your own intuition and objectivity. And the ability to go and know where to look for the right information. Now, the problem we have at the moment is unbelievable what's going on, but there's been so much censorship for doctors and scientists and whistleblowers all around the world. And I belong to the UK, and I'm in Scotland, so we've had a kind of censorship bill recently, and all sorts of things, like a kind of no hate bill. But there's a lot of things going on with censorship and not being able to have freedom of speech and speaking out and question things. And a detective cannot find the right information if they're not able to ask questions and be able to listen and to get other people's point of view and look at things from a different perspective than that's related to their belief system. If you get a detective going in and they have their own agenda and their own beliefs, and they are only look at life in a certain way and only look at people a certain way or look at certain things, they're not going to be a very good detective because they're coming in with their own personal bias. And it's one of the reasons that I always say to my students, when you are dealing with a client, do not bring, don't make assumptions, don't make presumptions, you have to take every client that comes in the door, you have to look at them from a fresh, clean slate. And you have to try and let go of your personal bias. But what a detective does is tries to look at the facts. It uses their intuition and their really heightened intuition to dig deeper and see things that they may have never saw before. And that aspect of the radar being so in. So when someone's got a really high intuition, they sense when something's off. Now, they don't always, like I used to always react when I sense something off, even with clients or students, and felt as if it was my responsibility, whatever they were dealing with. I'm not saying I don't sometimes react. I do. You know, there's a little bit of the rescue with me, and that's still work. I'm still working on that. But what I mean is, the intuitive, and particularly if we look at highly sensitive empaths, a highly sensitive empath is someone who has the extreme traits of the highly sensitive person, where they're extremely sensitive to emotions, certain things, and whatever. And they're on a certain scale and they feel things very deeply and they sense things very deeply. The empath feels it often physically in their own body. And the problem is, if they've not learned to have boundaries, they take it on physically. Now, highly sensitive empath has the advantages of being so sensitive to information, and sometimes it can be overwhelmed. So if they were a detective, they have to be very mindful. Sorry. They have to be very mindful of, sorry. They have to be very, very mindful of their energy and be able to discern also what's theirs, what's somebody else's, what else is going on. But they tend to pick up, so they notice things at an energetic level. So when things don't seem right, something doesn't seem like truth, they sense that. Now, you bring the empath into the sensitive aspect of when you combine it with the empath who really feels, they often, for example, feel the collective pain, they can feel other people's physical pain, they can feel the energy in a room, and maybe the energy of an animal, the energy of a foreboding about what's about to happen, right? I used to get premonitions and feel when something was going to happen. Now, I don't have probably premonitions come through in a different way than what I did when I was younger. But one of the things that I do have is this kind of, it comes like a foreboding and an unknowing when something, and sometimes one of my friends, I think I've stopped scaring, but basically he would say something to me and I would just come out with something about maybe someone or something. And then the next thing, something would happen. And that is an aspect of where, thinking about the movies, sometimes a good detective is in the middle of a case and starts to think and gets this intuition and thinks, something's not right. I think this is going to happen. Now, maybe there's no logic to it, but they use their intuition to then go and look at factual information, go and look for something else to back it up, right? And that's the key, and that's where a really good therapist or healer does. And the key is, again, it's listening and asking the right questions. If you don't ask your clients the right questions and don't listen clearly enough, you waste their time, you can waste your own time, and you can lead them away down a windy path, like the detective that doesn't listen. And the detective that doesn't follow their intuition can end up going down all these windy roads and end up maybe, coming up with the wrong person, or and a client, the wrong think it's the wrong diagnosis, or the wrong problem, and a lot of these things come with experience. That's why you can tend to tell when you work with a healer or therapist what kind of experience they have and how aware they are and how intuitive they are and how objective they are. And we just need to look at the last 4 years through a certain pandemic and see where, like, people lacked, a lot of the masses of people lacked critical thinking and objectivity, and were so emotionally hooked in by certain, I would say, propaganda and push to do everything that certain people told them to do, even though they weren't doing it. And I'm not saying that because I do believe there were certain things on over the last 4 years that were definitely things that were unhealthy, and there were things, that's not what I mean. But what I mean is, a mass level, most people were not using their intuition and their inner guidance, and were not using objectivity, and were lacking critical thinking skills. If you really want to be a good therapist or healer, you often need good critical thinking skills. because every client will come to you with different challenges. And of course, it depends on what you're specialising in, what you're focusing on. But one of the things, for example, is really required when someone is dealing with someone with a lot of complex or chronic health challenges, or really maybe terminal illnesses and things like that. Sometimes they really need to use their critical thinking head to look at all of the things that's going on, to try and help that person at a really deep level. Now, of course, it's not our job in one level to heal. We're part of the process. But one of the things that I do notice in, a lot of the healing industry, there's a lot of claims. There's a lot, people make a lot of claims that they can't back up and they can't almost guarantee. And part of being a good critical thinker and a good detective and a highly intuitive is actually also known where your area of expertise is. So if you think about a detective, someone might really be good at street crime. Other person might be a really good detective for maybe banking or banking scams or international, don't know, like some kind of espionage or something, whatever it is, right? There's all different people with different types of skills in their area of expertise. And of course, a good detective, if there's a really hard case, they're going to bring in a detective often if they can, that is really good in that area. Say it was a child, God forbid, but a child abduction or something like that. They're going to bring somebody in that has understanding of that. And this is why it's really important for you as the healer or therapist to know where your area of expertise, what it's not. And I'll give you some examples where sometimes healing and therapy businesses can go down basically they don't survive because they're trying to be the detective of too many things, and even within a niche. So one of the challenges where I've saw a lot of businesses really struggle with, unless they've got a lot of money behind them, is focusing on complex chronic health conditions. Now, if you look at things like ME, chronic fatigue, sorry, that was off. If you look at things like ME, chronic fatigue, and I don't mean just chronic fatigue because that's misleading. What I mean is chronic fatigue syndrome, or where there's lots of other complex. We're talking about things like lupus, MS, ALS. When you look at all these type of conditions, right, where there can be a lot of things going on for the individual, right? Now, when people try to support clients like that, the problem that they do have is that there is not so many facets, and every client is individual. And for a lot of these type of things, there's often people will have, there'll be some standard symptoms, but other people will have all sorts of things going on for all sorts of reasons. And for example, if you decide to try and be a practitioner and help them with all areas, you really struggle. And I know quite a few businesses that started up trying to offer that. And the reality is they realised they didn't have enough skills to be able to cover all the challenges. So for example, it might be that people need help with nutrition. They might need help with, maybe deeper emotional challenges. They might need help with sensitivities, mobility, rehabilitation, psychological support, stress management, realizing there's so many facets to all of these kind of diseases. And a lot of these businesses realized that to really help clients, they needed a multifaceted approach, but they couldn't do it on their own. Now, the ones that really worked better was those who maybe got a clinic together and maybe had, for example, someone, a body therapist for that, a nutritionist for that, a naturopath, and they had different people that would specialize, because no one person can specialize enough in those areas to support the individual. And that worked better. But most business models where practitioners were trying to treat these individuals, they had so many problems because they realized they could maybe be the detective and see all the things, but they couldn't cater for everything. And in some cases, they just didn't have the skills and they burnt themselves out trying to get the information for all clients, trying to look further, and it didn't work. So, it's always, all these things are important to understand and become aware of. So where do you use the detective in your business or even your life? Because, for example, as I said, awakening at the moment, many people are starting to wake up, that they have got lazy in their critical thinking skills, have never even formed critical thinking skills. And critical thinking is like everything. It's something, if we don't use it, we kind of lose it, right? And okay, some people are naturally going to be more critical thinkers just to do with roles that they do and whatever. And I don't know about you, but I've always been I've always liked detective stories, and I've always found I've been a bit of a medical mystery for a lot of things, and I've needed a lot of kind of detective skills sometimes to go way down the rabbit hole, and that's found, that's been interesting. Um, the reality is that even when we get down the rabbit hole, it's about objectivity, because you can go down a rabbit hole and then you lose sight of what you're going down the hole for, and you start going off on all sorts of tangents. But the detective archetype is an archetype, like all archetypes have little aspects within us all. And some of them are very heightened, and some of them it's, we're not utilising it. But I think at the moment for discernment, for people to be able to take their power back and to be able to take, to look at information objectively, they have to understand and be able to recognise when things may not, even what's been presented as truth, may not be truth, because that's what often happens with a detective. A detective may be told something or given some information, but then their intuition tells them if this may not be the whole picture. And this is one of the things, when we know that something may not be the whole picture, we then are open to looking at another story or another narrative that may be completely different to what you thought. And one of the things that sometimes can happen is, and I found this quite interesting, that sometimes when I dealt even with medical professionals, I had such a long, strange medical history that my file was so big that most doctors didn't have the time to look at it. So they would look at what you were presenting right now, and they would almost want to make a diagnosis on just what they saw. And this is the problem we can have if we are not good detectives in our work, and if we make assumptions about a client or a student before we know the bigger picture, and we know all, we can make big boop-ups. We can missell things to clients, and we can actually cause them more problems. And again, it's one of the reasons why I always like to take a multifaceted approach when I'm teaching things, and I always say to my students that never use I rarely think of a one-size-fits approach for all clients, for anything. And it's always important to listen, be objective, and also be open that we've always got something to learn. Every day is a school day, and when you think you know everything, and when you think you have it all, that's when the problems start. It's always too important to be open, and also open enough to even challenge beliefs or learnings and teachings you had before. But believe me, sometimes the longer you go on the path, then other things come in to challenge. Even teachings within the healing and therapy industry will challenge some of those beliefs of what even you've been previously taught before. And that's what it's all about. It's about being open to learning. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. If you would like some help in any area, if you've got any area of wounding, archetypal, or something that's going on in your life that is blocking you spiritually, stopping you feel more soul empowered or soul aligned, are really getting somewhere area you're stuck in your awakening to move forward, to get your power back, book a one-on-one session. I'm offering now more spiritually supported sessions where I use tailored approach to you for you, and that is often a combination of inner child, archetypal, some coaching, healing, and whatever else you need. That's how I work. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow if you've liked this video. Even share if you feel right. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Bye bye for now.